Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
We are back, and today we're going to be sharing with you some specific things to say to sound like you're a true real estate pro. And these are all the little inside real estate words and phrases and acronyms and all the little things. But also what we're doing is we're helping to educate you so when you're talking to consumers, they'll get the vibe from you that you definitely are operating at a different level.
That's right. These are specific talking points so that you can talk the talk and have confidence. After all, knowledge equals confidence, ignorance equals fear. And when you have these powerful talking points showing your knowledge, you are more likely to do lots of things, but most notably, talk about real estate wherever you go. Don't be a secret agent anymore. Proactively lead generate. You'll speak confidently from open houses to calling expireds to popping by the for sale by owners in your town. You'll ask for and secure more business.
And what we're doing is we don't want you to sound like you're just a National Association of Realtors press release reader, basically. We want you to say things that are going to be indicative of the types of things that somebody who's actually thought about things as a professional would say. So when someone says, for example, it's the winter, it's not a great time to sell a house. Well, Mr. Seller, I appreciate that you'd say that, but if I could actually show you statistically that homes have a tendency to sell for more, closer to the list price than they would say in the spring, would you still want to hold your house off the market? So what we want you to do is not just sound like every other agent. We want you to have, as always, an unfair advantage in the marketplace. And Julie, you're a perfect example of your first one, of the first point you wrote down, is point number 1. Early spring for existing home sales, maybe not. It's too soon to tell, but it's looking good.
That's right. So how would we say, to your point, some of these are almost like objection handlers. Somebody says, the market's so slow. Well, I can see why you would think that, but the early spring market for existing home sales actually rose 2.2% month over month from December to January to 4.24 million units, seasonally adjusted annualized rate. What that means is, based on that increase, if you wind that out over 12 months, that we're going up, not down. Even though it seems slow, we're actually ahead. Some buyers actually did power through the low temperatures but high rates. That's the fastest pace of sales that we've seen since February of last year.
But here is what Julie and I pay attention to many major markets across the country. And for sure, there was a slower sales month last month. But for sure, it's boiling up to be a better sales month or better closings month over the next 60 to 90 days. And that honestly makes sense because a lot of people, because of the election, because of the storms, and because of all the other things, they took themselves out of the market. If not physically out of the market, emotionally out of the market, they weren't willing to make commitments. And sellers, the same thing. I mean, it's all natural, normal things that you shouldn't find surprising that happens during an election year, during the holidays, during really incremental weather, all those things. But guess what's happening? All the people that would have closed over the last, say, 60 days, they're still in the market, and they're going to start rushing to market now. And that's what we're already seeing in the early numbers.
Exactly. Again, we're growing modestly, 2.2%, but it's still going the right direction. And that's especially important, to your point, this time of year. We barely were out of the holidays. We had an election. We had terrible weather. We had all kinds of things going on.
And again, what we're trying to do, guys, is we're trying to get you to think, and talk as if you actually were operating at the highest of levels when you're around buyers and sellers. And again, I'm going to use the word that we learned from our 11-year-old daughter, vibe. The vibe they'll get from you is different than the agent who's just basically sounding like they're reading National Association of Realtors talking points.
That's right. Most notably, a positive and fact-based vibe.
Yes,
right?
we're facting you, as Julie's fond of saying.
Exactly. Speaking of facts, people will always transact because of their circumstances dictating that makes a housing change, right? So how could we be up in the coldest time of year during a lot of strange things happening, right? It's because the circumstances are more powerful than lack of inventory, rates, or political climate. How many sales were in your market last month? How many sales do you even need to meet or exceed your goals?
Now, this is what we're going to get into the weeds, because this is really what's going to make you guys rise above your competition. Because Again, market dynamics are one thing. Supply and demand is one thing, but housing has got something else going for it that normal supply and demand or normal business cycles don't necessarily take into consideration. This is the reason when you listen to a lot of the wonks from Wall Street and they're just using the normal ways you go about predicting what the future of a business is going to be, they try to apply that same knowledge base to real estate. It doesn't work. And real estate really does require you to know all the sort of formalized ways of valuing something, the direction of a market, predictability. You can maybe go about using those sort of traditional methods when you're trying to predict what the value of a real estate stock is going to be. But actual buyer and seller activity, it's completely different because a home is unlike any other, I'm not going to...
asset class or however you want to call.
Well, I mean, let's just call it what it really is. It's a consumer product, really.
Sure.
But it's unlike any other consumer product that you can possibly imagine. So that's the reason that normal market dynamics, supply and demand, don't always or aren't always the most important thing when you're trying to essentially predict or explain the nature of a housing market.
That's right. It's not just an economic, chart and graph system. We also have to be a bit of a psychologist, right?
Well, you do. And it's emotions, but it's also understanding demographics. Mm-hmm. And when you're listening to somebody who's used to analyzing, charts and whatnot for predicting stock values, or trying to explain the gyrations in a particular equity class, they can't effectively explain housing because nowhere in their calculus are the effects of emotions. And guess what? Housing is pretty much the most emotional product you're going to buy.
Yes, as some of you doing your transactions are very clear on, right?
Exactly.
Do people get a little emotional? Sometimes. So speaking of which, maybe the anthropomorphic part of this or the sociology, there's so many things involved in real estate sales beyond just the economic forecasts. So I went ahead, speaking of what you said, and researched why do people move in the dead of winter? And why are sales actually up so far in 2025?
And these reasons are true any time of a year, but these are kind of the things that people don't really quite conceptualize, especially when they're just reading charts and graphs.
And they are mostly circumstantial. So, for example, changing family dynamics. Evolving family structures significantly impact homeowners' selling decisions. In Q4 of last year, 34% of homeowners considering selling indicated that an expanding household size influenced their decision, and 41% cited a decreasing household size. So multi-generational buyers are becoming more and more commonplace. Market your larger homes, your multiple structure listings, or funky floor plans to capture that multi-generational buyer.
But let's look at this. Julie, you were giving me an example of a coaching client you had, and she had a property. You told me about this yesterday.
Tammy Irby in Northern Virginia.
Okay, let me just, so I'm making sure that we're being succinct with our story.
Yep.
She tried to market this rather oddball property three different ways. And by essentially changing MLS descriptions and whatnot. Mm-hmm. She didn't change pictures from what you said. She didn't change price. But when she actually decided the third go around, because she obviously wanted to sell the listing, as describing it as a multi-generational housing sort of complex sort of thing, then it sold.
Like a family complex type of thing.
Right.
That's right. And so she was actually testing it. Yes, the MLS. I think she had some Facebook ads, just different things. And it was always the same pictures, same description, didn't change. The square footage didn't change. But this was a larger home. I think it had like 17 acres. It was a little bit unusual. So she tried what most agents would do. Executive housing, city close, near the freeways, all the things that
probably
we're used to reading,
redevelopment
right?
or whatever.
Exactly.
17 acres, yeah.
Yeah, like you would typically try and zhuzh up a listing like that. She tried another one like maybe a corporate retreat or something of that nature, and then this multi-generational, and she said basically 100% of her calls, she also had a really kick-ass open house, this was $1 million property, were looking for some kind of a multi-generational housing solution.
And there is no real search term or search, way in any MLS that I'm aware of where it has multi-generational housing as an option, right?
You just have to promote it that
She
way.
has to promote it. But now look see what a little interesting niche that in this particular community, if there's other similar properties, she now knows there's a huge pent-up demand for multi-generational housing options. And she could, very quickly go and start dominating that little niche and then have a tremendous year. And if I remember correctly, this was quite an expensive property too.
$1 million, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So
and we did talk about that on her coaching call.
Of course you did. Well, so listen, if you guys like what you're getting from today's podcast, as I know you are, make sure you are joining Premier Coaching. It is without a doubt the fast track for you to have your best year ever. And we've made it so easy for you to say yes, yes, yes. Just go to premiercoaching.com or you can text the word Premier to 47372, and we'll text you back a link to join. And we've got so many amazing upgrades. We're kind of calling it Premier Coaching 2.0. So if you're involved in the coaching program before, we've upgraded virtually everything, but most importantly, what we upgraded, what we added, was our new designation, which is included with Premier Coaching, called Ethical Real Estate Professional. If you guys want to see what that looks like, just go to ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. And so what's going to happen is you're going to be in Premier Coaching. You're going to learn, your soup to nuts, complete business system, how to lead generate, how to do all the things, scale your real estate business. But once you've taken the Ethical Real Estate Professional pledge, then you're actually going to have essentially what's going to be one of the most prestigious designations in the real estate industry. Go look at what it looks like. And remember, this is included with Premier Coaching. And you can join Premier Coaching right now for free. Just go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372. And yes, that does include a daily semi-private coaching call with one of our Harris certified coaches. By the way, you can cancel Premier Coaching at any time. There's no tricks. There's no long-term contracts. There's no, gotchas. If you don't like what you're experiencing after you've been in Premier Coaching, you can cancel. No problem. We know you won't, because of the value that we're delivering. So just go to premiercoaching.com, 0 risk to you. You can join right now, cost you absolutely nothing, and you get full 30 days of access for free.
All right, so again, we're talking about why are people actually moving? We're giving you the talking points, we're giving you the facts and the percentages. Another reason people moved recently was market perceptions and timing. Homeowners' perceptions of the housing market influence their selling decisions. About 39% think that they'll get a better deal on a new home now than in the future. Makes sense. Are prices going up or going down? And 45% believe they'll be able to sell their home for more money now than in the future. That's interesting because those two things kind of conflict, but it goes back to what people believe about why they would move now. Next is the desire for, guess what, updated or newly constructed homes. 31% of homes available for sale are newly built. NAR expects at least 15% of sales of actually closed homes in 2025 to be new construction.
Let me hover there. So Julie and I are working on, well, when I say Julie and I, she didn't want to do this one, so I'm going to have to write it, a podcast where we're going to write what we hope Trump's housing plan is going to be once all of the folks are past the Senate hearings, FHFA, head and Treasury and all the rest of it. So once those guys or gals are in place, we know they're going to be coming out with what will feel like an unbelievably radical, and I mean that in a positive way, housing plan. We have some glimpses of what we think is going to be in the housing plan. We know, for example, we have strong belief that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac will come out of conservatorship. We already know, and you guys know as well, that a lot of federal land is going to be made available for housing development. We know all kinds of things are going to be being built and being constructed, and all kinds of incentives are going to be being offered specifically to new construction. It is our belief, and we're going to do some more homework on this before we formalize our presentation to you, hoping that Trump doesn't come out with his plan before we come out with what we think his plan will be and beats us to the market,
it's
right?
Kind of busy, so we're good.
Well, maybe. But at the end of the day, we really don't see a way that new construction isn't the pointy end of the stick for what's going to be part of a very long-term generational housing, essentially boom. Mission for the, beyond boom. I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah, a movement almost. It's interesting you mentioned that, and we are going to get into the weeds on a future podcast more. I read today that for every new regulation or red tape or whatever you want to call it that is passed, there is a requirement across the board in every agency, including housing, including land development. For every new thing passed, that department has to kill 10 regulations. Well, it's a 1 to 10 ratio.
So Julie and I are sitting down yesterday or the day before, and we're talking with someone who's very knowledgeable. We're going to have him on the podcast about the whole Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac conservatorship thing. He's going to be on the podcast next week or the week after that. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking him about, Julie and I have been researching this on our own, but this guy has specific drill down knowledge that we didn't have. And I don't want to bore you guys, but PMI, whether you know it or not, is one of the things that when you hear people that are talking, and they're not very many, but there's some that are talking as they don't want Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be released from conservatorship. And the reason that pretty much is the only conclusion, you can't come up with a reason why other than what I'm about to tell you, is because all the folks that are anti-released from conservatorship are making money from PMI. And so Julie and I did a little homework to find out what the average, if there were no PMI on loans, and so first of all, you're buying private mortgage insurance for the mortgage company, and the buyer's the one paying for it. Who are the buyers that get stuck with PMI? First-time buyers. So what the average cost of PMI on an average mortgage amount nowadays, what is that equivalent to in terms of interest rate? It's a lot. No. So if there were no longer a PMI, or was no longer a requirement of a Fannie Freddie mortgage, which is I think like 90% of the mortgage market right now, that would be akin to having lower interest rates, which would make it affordable for a whole bunch of other folks, and all kinds of other positive ramifications from Fannie Freddie coming out of conservatorship. And you compound that with some of the things that, I mean, look, Pulte, right,
Pulte.
is head of one of his, I think he already got confirmed, I'm not sure.
Coming up, I think.
Well,
yeah.
that would be Pulte of Pulte Homes. So
Yes.
I'm going to throw a dart at a board here, and I think I'm probably going to be pretty accurate in guessing that new construction is going to be a big part of whatever.
For sure. I mean, read the tea leaves, right? And it's interesting you talk about if PMI were to go away, it doesn't just affect the payment, but because it affects the payment, it also gives that borrower who is, again, our weakest borrower in some senses, because they're usually first-time buyers, they're less expensive.
How many
et cetera.
deals have you guys lost because the buyer couldn't qualify for the mortgage payment because the stupid PMI?
Right, that's what I'm saying. So it's not just giving them a lower payment, but because of that, they have better buying power. They can buy more house, potentially, and it makes it so that it's easier for them to qualify, to your point. So it could affect many different aspects, and this is... Yeah, I mean, what is it? 38% of the market is first-time buyers in that price range. So that by itself, just that one thing, could really help the market. So
yeah, I
think
mean,
there's a
so
lot of good
you
for that.
combine, for example, this is the reason Julie and again, we're looking for arguments to prove us that we're wrong. We always love to be given challenges about the ways we believe, but specifically with regards to new construction, I don't see, Julie doesn't see, and we're meeting with people that are, smarter than we are.
Big-brained.
Right, exactly, big-brained. We're looking for reasons why that is not going to be the case. Because, for example, builders can buy down interest rates. So can your homeowners that are selling homes, but getting them to explain how that whole thing works is complicated, I mean, it just is. It takes some sales skills. We do teach you how to do that in Premier Coaching, obviously. But at the end of the day, builders are going to be buying down interest rates. Builders are going to make it so payments on houses that cost more than comparable resale homes, the payments will be less. And now if you're able to get rid of PMI, you're talking about new construction looking better and better and better. And that is
sure.
unquestionably where the direction where most major markets are going to go, especially as you see the positive effects, there I said it, of tariffs. And we're going to talk about tariffs as well and on another podcast.
Yep, we'll get into that. So our last reason for people moving, 13% of moves recently were relocation driven. Now, they didn't split out what type of relocation. Some of it was for job relocation. Some of it was voluntary relocation, like snowbirds wanting warmer weather, that kind of thing. But that's another driver. So that was all point number one. Things are selling. It might feel slow, but things are actually happening. All right, number two. New home sales, we just talked about that a bit, but in December of last year, new home sales rose almost 4% month over month and almost 7% year over year to 698,000 units, again, seasonally adjusted. The median new home sales price climbed 6% month over month to $427,000. That's just 6% above the median sales price for existing homes at $404,000, which is interesting. The disparity between new and resale isn't as wide as it used to be.
Well, I mean, I wonder where that money's going, right? Obviously, a lot of buying down points.
Yeah.
But Julie, one of the things that we also have researched, and this is shocking in my opinion, is the average. What was it, Julie? 25% of the cost of every new home. Am I getting that wrong?
That's right.
Goes to government regulation.
Yep.
And I think that's obviously taken into consideration some of the states that have a lot of government regulations.
That's average, and I know that like California, I believe it's quite a bit more than that.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah, that's the average.
but the Californias will pull your average way the
Sure,
hell up
sure.
versus, say, for example, your Houstons who have virtually none.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so think about that. Think about what Julie just said. The average cost is $404,000. Again, we're confirming all of this because it sounds crazy, but you're telling me the $100,000 of that $404,000 or $427,000
yeah.
is going to essentially expense that
permits, regulations, requirements, all that kind of stuff.
And then you factor in the cost of the PMI. You guys see what we're getting at here? I mean, there's going to be an unfair advantage that new construction is going to have over resale. And it is even possible that depending on what happens in these, with all this government regulation, you could even see the cost of a new construction home be less than the price of a resale home. No, we're not predicting.
That's a radical thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, all these things. So we're going to be doing more homework on this. But point number 3, Julie.
All right. So anticipated trends. Again, what do you talk about when you are at Orange Theory working out? What do you talk about when you're at a cocktail party, when you're following up on your leads? Well, anticipated trends for this year. The 2025 housing forecast indicates that mortgage rates are expected to average out around 6.3%. Today's rate, I looked it up right before we recorded, is 6.9%. It was in the low sevens for a while.
You know, it's pretty funny that people basically go, "Oh my God, the rates are too high."
I know.
I mean, y'all don't realize this, but that was considered a low rate for I don't even know how many years.
Certainly when we bought our first house, people were dying to have 7%.
That's right.
It's amazing. It's all perspective, right? Additionally, home prices are projected to rise by at least 4% in 2025 after an increase that ended up nationwide 4% in 2024.
Okay, so let me give this in digestible format so they can actually think about how to maybe explain this to a consumer.
Certainly.
So if the consumer is buying a house for $400,000 and the house is going to increase in value, let's just say in your particular market, I was an English major, so I'm going to keep my math simple, by 5%, let's say, because 4% is the average according to the research that Julie just did, right?
Yep.
So it's 5%. So that $400,000 house next year is worth, on paper anyway, right? Is worth $420,000. What was the payment with a moderate down payment on that house? All right, so let's say the increase in value by 20 grand is roughly the same as what the payment was. Maybe the payment was even more, but if you look at that cost compared to the money they would have spent on rent, for example, then you're looking at essentially a different set of calculus. Now, factor in increased values over the next 5 years of, say, 5% per year, and then do the math. Take out whatever the total PMI or the total PITI was, and then figure out what the total amount of money that I'm not calculating in, repairs and whatnot, but just if you compare the total monthly payment versus the total increase of the home over the last 5 years or the next 5 years, if you're assuming 5% per year, remember it compounds every year, then what are you looking at in terms of how much money they actually spent when you look at the appreciation on the home against the payment on the home, even with principal, interest, taxes, and insurance? You following me on all that? In most cases, they didn't pay anything for the house because the increase in value covered the payment. You can't do that with rent.
That's right. When you are paying rent, it's essentially paying 100% interest. None of that money is yours at the end.
But that's also for more expensive homes, up to a certain point, granted, but that also works for more expensive homes too.
Yes, that's a good word problem to feed into ChatGPT if you have things that are not exactly 5% or exactly 400,000.
Well, but like, for example, if your marketplace isn't, you have entry point is 1.5 million.
Sure.
But you're looking at, let's say, the average increase in value that's predicted. And by the way, these guys are always predicting wrong. I don't know if you've noticed that. But let's just say you're in your market, it's going to be 4% per year. 4% of 1.5 million is $60,000. Right, so 5 years is going to be $300,000. Calculate that against, or do the math against what the payment was, and chances are that buyer maybe is not completely breaking even versus the appreciation, but I bet it's pretty damn close. So these are the types of fun conversations you can have with people when they're bemoaning the interest rates.
Yes, again, to our talking points. Knowledge equals confidence, ignorance equals fear.
And one thing, I did scan your notes, Julie, that you didn't take into consideration,
What's
and
that?
I don't want to get too nerdy here.
Too late.
Too late. I know exactly. Is inflation.
True.
So inflation went up. Basically, inflation, if you want our humble opinion, there's no going back to 2%. You're going to start seeing the government start saying the target inflation is, they probably won't even talk about it anymore. Inflation is what inflation is going to be. And no matter of matriculation to the Fed interest rates and all the rest of it, inflation is what inflation is going to be. So you're probably going to look at the inflation rates hovering around 3 to 4%. But remember, when you hear the inflation rate, they're not taking into the cost of housing. That's the thing that's quite hilarious. You guys should research this yourself. When you're hearing about the inflation rate, just Google this. Or use ChatGPT or whatever. Does it take into consideration the actual cost of housing? And it doesn't. It doesn't. So the most expensive thing that people pay for that's increasing in cost if they're renting or if they're borrowing is not being factored into the overall inflation rate.
Makes zero sense.
That's quite hilarious, don't you think? It's called homeowners equivalent. I forget what
equivalent rent, which is based on calling people and asking them what they'd rent their own house for, or something crazy.
Well, we don't want to even try to explain. You guys, if you're interested in that, if you're super nerds or deciding to put on a cape and become a super nerd and join our super nerd tribe, just hit the ChatGPT and learn more about it, because you will laugh your ass off like the first time we discovered this, 15, 20 years ago.
Totally.
It's called owner's equivalent of rent.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say it now that I said it. So basically what they do is they call up homeowners and they ask homeowners, randos, if you were to rent your house, what do you think the rent would be, or what would you pay? That's how they go about ascertaining what they think the average rental or the average inflation in homeownership or essentially in housing is. That very question. You think I'm making that up, but I am not. Go and research that yourself. It's not the actual numbers of how much homes have increased in value. It's calling randos who are not even in the housing market and asking what they would pay for their house monthly if they were to rent it.
Might not even be the owner. I just have this vision of like Zoe answering the phone, getting that question, because she sounds like she's grown up enough, right?
How'd they even come up with that?
And her answer would be like, well, can I pay in Roblox gift cards?
Exactly.
Like, well, I don't know. Anyway, okay, so back to our facts. Sales of existing homes, and this is something that I think you and I both probably disagree with, but this is the current projection. Sales of existing homes are anticipated to grow. This is number of sales by 1.5% to just over 4 million. That'd be like the third year in a row like that. Still below the 2013 to 19 average. They use that because those were the last batch of years that were considered to be, quote, normal. I would disagree with that as well because we had low inventory during that time. But the supply of homes for sale is expected to improve, so that's good. Supply goes up by almost 12%. And again, new home construction is projected to surge by almost 14%, getting to over 1 million new units. Now, if you put all that together and we have less regulation and we have easier qualifying and decent rates, I really think we're going to get at least to 4.5 million sales, maybe even better if we get some enthusiasm.
And that's
behind it.
resales. I agree with what you said based on what we're seeing in our EXP Realty group, of what we're seeing activity there, but also what we're hearing from our thousands of coaching clients.
Yes.
We're definitely seeing, and Julie and I we can look back we have really good statistics and numbers for like 6 years. Our EXP Realty group, our coaching clients, things like that. And we can definitely see there's more momentum happening this time of year than there was, I would say, for the last 3 similar times of year. So we're anticipating an increase, but the wild cards are many, right? So we don't know what the exuberance will be from whatever housing policies that Trump declares. A lot of this is driven on emotion. Remember, we started out by saying housing is not something you can just basically graph out and predict very effectively. You have to use, that's the reason that all kinds of modeling methods that they use for trying to predict stock values don't really work, because none of them take into consideration emotion. So if people are feeling more optimistic, they spend money. When people are feeling really optimistic, or making babies, they're, guess what, buying houses, or all the rest of the reasons that people buy and sell real estate. So the non-sort of analytical perspectives are the things that you guys need to dial in when you're really trying to get a feel for what's happening in your marketplace.
That's right. And things like, Pulte being involved in the government agency now, that could be very impactful.
Well, I'll tell you what you and I talked about this. So since we're, I cannot see how, again, let's say Trump comes out with a housing plan that's even more aggressive than we thought. And the markets, there'll obviously be the naysayers and whatnot. But let's just say early indications are it's going to build up to be a generational housing boom. When will we actually start seeing the benefits of that? Probably fourth quarter into next year. Mm-hmm. That would be,
it'll take a bit.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's going to take a bit to get Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship. It's going to take a bit for people to sort of wrap their minds around the fact that, there's a new construction boom going on. It's going to take a while for a lot of these new construction companies to ramp up the potential demand.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
For sure. It's, but that's something, fortunately for all of you listening, you have time to get involved in all that.
Do you think I was thinking about this actually this morning. Do you think there'll be any kind of tax incentives for I'm wondering if there are going to be tax incentives for consumers to transact, let's say buy. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's going to be I think there will be tax incentives for builders to build on some of the formerly government-controlled land. I think there will be tax incentives there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to figure out how the government's going to use tax incentives to give incentives to create demand in markets where there otherwise wouldn't be. And by the way, when done correctly, that really can have a massive positive impact on housing. If the government decides to obviously, set aside this big swath of land that's right outside of a majorly hot housing market, and make it so there's no, essentially all the Mickey Mouse building codes and requirements that are maybe burdening the adjacent market. And all of a sudden you can, as a builder, go there and build something and be very competitive with, you guys can see how this can really open up the competitive pressures. And that's ultimately what has to happen for housing.
That's good for the economy too, because all those houses, think about what housing supports. all of the different, if Costco moves in because people need home goods and they need groceries and, then all the things that go around Costco. So we're going to drill down on a future podcast.
Well, Julie, it's like when, again, you have to do your own homework. So we're going to just for a microsecond talk about tariffs, okay? She's giving me a glare because she knows I want to talk about it. But
it's okay.
I
have two more points here. But
all right,
okay.
so there's so much bad. I didn't know about tariffs. Julie and I researched it. Here's what we learned. So tariffs were in place and we're funding the entire country. And then McKinley, that was back when President McKinley was in office. And then later, federal income tax came into place. So Trump said, and guess who predicted this? Tim and Julie Harris did, 3 or 4 Fridays ago, that Trump was going to come out and say, let's not have a federal income tax, let's replace it by tariffs. And so all these people started saying there's not enough federal income or not enough money that'll come from tariffs to cover federal income tax. Well, we did some research on it, and there sure as hell would be if you tariff the 20%. So only 20% of all consumer items, and this is another thing that's being very fascinating. Actually, I researched it this morning. 15.9% of all consumer items are actually imported that would experience a tariff. 15.9%.
Gotcha.
But some of those are very expensive. So if you put a 20% tariff against a new Porsche, for example,
right.
you're going to obviously raise a lot of money. And that's, but the point is the consumer can decide where to spend the money. A tariff is a tax, but it's a voluntary tax because you can, instead of buying that Porsche, you can buy something else that's domestic. You guys get the point? But what the bottom line is tariffs could be something that would completely completely open up the cash flow for all major tax-paying Americans. I'm kind of stumbling over my words.
And it's not a radical new idea.
The average family in America who pays taxes, because not all people do, are paying $16,000 a year. So if federal taxes were no longer necessary, and that $16,000 was left in people's pockets, and it was covered by the tariffs that are only happening to 16% of all products, what would people do with that $16,000? I know. They would probably start buying more expensive homes.
Yes,
and that would be money they could use towards more expensive house payments. You guys get it?
It's all related, isn't
right.
it?
So to make sure when you're hearing the propagandized interpretation of some of the plans that are coming out of Washington, D.C., both pro and against, do your own homework and don't believe the talking points.
Okay, speaking of which, I have to.
Did I just bait you?
Since you baited me, the place that I find really great for explaining this and understanding what's actually in the works is actually whitehouse.gov. I read one this morning that was super extensive and interesting and full of facts and reality, which was the executive order for tariffs. And it broke down everything for, Canada, Mexico, and China. And they're not exactly the same. I have Canadian coaching clients, as you do. Our coaches talk to the Canadians. One of the things they were freaking out about with the tariffs was they send a lot of lumber here for our new construction, right? And it actually said in the tariffs, even though I think generally towards Canada, we're doing a 25% tariff until they stop the fentanyl, and there's a bunch of facts about that, and illegal immigration, all that kind of thing. On lumber and home, I think it was specific to home building materials, the tariff was only 10%.
There you go.
So when somebody says, we're not going to be able to build any more used Canadian lumber, actually get your facts straight.
If you've ever been on the Pacific Northwest and you don't think that we make building materials, for example, lumber, go to the Pacific Northwest, and all you'll see when you're driving down from like Washington State are massive, obviously
lumber operations.
It's incredible. So I would venture a guess that the Canadians have been underpricing their building materials by 10%, and they're effectively going to now have to pay what it costs in the U.S. But if the U.S. then starts getting rid of some of these regulations on some of these businesses to make us globally competitive again, then you're going to see, especially with the tariffs, the U.S.-made products, be it lumber or be it windows, are going to be substantially less than the imports.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And what I read, I think it said it wasn't just lumber. It was like anything having to do with building houses. So there's probably more to the story. But I do like whitehouse.gov. The whole website has been completely revamped. And if you're curious about something like tariffs, it's a pretty good explainer, actually.
You know what's kind of funny about today's podcast? It's highly nerdy. I know some of you are listening and picking things up. I want you to remember all of our notes are available at harrisrealestatedaily.com. That's our free newsletter, and you can just subscribe. Obviously, free means you don't have to pay anything. So all of our notes, especially our long-winded notes from today's show, harrisrealestatedaily.com. Use these notes to fact your potential buyers and sellers, or maybe you can use this for yourself on social media. All the information is waiting for you over at harrisrealestatedaily.com. But here's the thing that's fascinating, at least for nerds like Julie and I, and a lot of you listening are nerds too, or potential nerds, is that, isn't it interesting how numbers and facts actually make you feel motivated? Because when you are knowledgeable about something and you are now having the full depth and breadth of really what tariffs, for example, mean, you're no longer intimidated by it because you now understand how it's going to positively impact your ability to help folks buy and sell real estate and your own financial future. So stay on that learning curve, and you're going to realize that a lot of the things that are being teed up in the economy right now because of the new government and frankly just because of demographics and housing trends in general are going to create a generational opportunity in real estate. We definitely, and you should be feeling this way too, are on the very foothills of the big climb up to what will be a completely different world for residential housing.
Very well said. Thank you for that. And sorry for our nerds in training. That's okay. You'll be there. All right, number 4. Some of you are leasing agents, some of you are renting yourselves, some of you are working with potential tenants. Rental rates are trending modestly downwards. To me, this sounds like stabilization for the most part. Nationally, rents fell just 0.2% in January, and the vacancy index peaked at almost 7% as new supply did outstrip demand. The most significant rental rate declines were in Austin. Well, I can speak to that. We just lowered one of our rentals. And Denver, Austin was down by 6.3% year over year. Denver, 4.5%. That comes from Apartment List. They keep these stats. Now, interestingly, Cleveland, Detroit, and Washington, D.C. saw rent increase between 3 and 5%. So these stats vary quite a bit based on where you are in the country. So make sure you know your own stats, not just city to city, but within your city. And point number 5, I think, is actually really interesting.
Let me tack on to that.
Go ahead.
So we're talking, generally speaking, when you hear these national rent statistics, they're not using single family comps, they're using multifamily comps. That said, you should be considering calling the single family homes that are for rent, especially ones that are being managed by the owners, and ask them, and this goes with VRBOs as well, and ask them if they consider renting, because the calculus for making, selling. Well, yes, that's right, selling. Ask them, it could very well be that they were on an adjustable rate mortgage and their mortgage is adjusted. Maybe the property is an investment property, is no longer viable. Maybe they're running negative. Maybe they're running negative and now the average rental for the similar property is dropping, so they're really running negative. You guys, this is going to increase when you hear that national rents are falling. Okay, well, that means there'll probably be an increase in inventory of homes. You just need to learn how to go after those potential sellers. You guys get it?
Go where the business is.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. And some of those towns have regulated VRBOs out of business too.
Yep.
So, all right, number 5, I find very interesting, and that's one of the little strands that I follow. Watch for new and innovative types of development, especially in urban environments. For example, the Arcade Providence in Providence, Rhode Island, was built way back in 1828. The Arcade in Providence is America's oldest indoor shopping mall, by quite a bit, I'd say, and it closed in 2008. It was revitalized into a mixed-use space with 48 micro lofts, little condos on the upper floors, and 20 retail shops at the ground level. So that transformation has breathed new life into that historic culture, offering modern living spaces, but still preserving its architectural heritage.
Historic structure. But yes.
Yes.
But here's
they're doing that to malls. They're doing that all kinds of stuff.
So all kinds of, that's interesting, and it makes sense to, but the problem ultimately with that is you're limited by the architectural
requirements
of the actual building. So like when you hear people building these cool new condos and whatever in an old high school or an old church, those are always compromised housing units because obviously they're trying to use the existing outward structure of it. So it's an interesting, the whole idea of reuse is one of those, ideas that sort of people talk about sometimes and has a lot of good feelings about because here we can use these old buildings. But when you actually look at the cost in the product, unless it's in a really great, already established, I want to live there type area, those types of developments are very hard to sell. That's what we've noticed.
Yeah, they can be, the ones like this was in a historic urban area, so maybe that'll do fine. But yeah, you're right. If you keep the original floor plan, it can end up being kind of a weird environment.
Well, it is.
And sometimes they end up selling for a lot less money because of that. Sometimes they end up being like work, office, live spaces. Some of it's, it'll be interesting to watch though. All right. So those are your top talking points for this week. Remember that knowledge equals confidence, ignorance equals fear. When you have the latest facts, you'll have more conversations IRL in real life and online. So for example, having real conversations, let's say you need 18 transactions this year based on your business plan that you did in Premier Coaching. Let's say that you want 18 deals. You've got to have 18 conversations today. Now, this may seem like a lot until you consider the following strategy. Adjust accordingly for your schedule, your situation. But let's say you've got an 18 contact per business day goal. You talk to 3 parents at your school drop-off, coming and going from the parking lot, say, maybe teachers, 3 people at the gym or on your dog walk in the neighborhood, 5 expired sellers. Every single one of you can find at least 5 expired sellers to actually speak with, 5 friends or people from your sphere in your database, and 2 for sale by owners. And that's not even counting your lead follow-up. Also, everything I just described is free. All you have to do is lather, rinse, and repeat. So now that you have talking points, we've removed all of your excuses.
That's right. So go to premiercoaching.com and join Premier Coaching right now for free. And just do that urgently. There's no reason not to. There's no downside. You're going to feel educated, motivated. You like this podcast, which we know literally thousands of you do. You listen to us every single day. Well, you will adore, love beyond words, being a member of Premier Coaching. And especially if you've been in Premier Coaching before, if this is your time to rejoin, because like I said, Julie and I have we probably worked harder in the last 6 months, now 7 months. Mm-hmm. Is that right? 7 months?
Probably.
Oh, gosh. Rehabbing Premier Coaching with the creation of Ethical Real Estate Professional than we have probably in the last 7 years.
Probably.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it.
You're going to love what you get with Premier Coaching now. So it's time for you to consider Premier Coaching 2.0. Go ahead and go over to Premier Coaching and join. And we will be giving you full access to Ethical Real Estate Professional probably this week. So that's going to give you an opportunity to be part of what we know will be the most prestigious designation that you can have in real estate. So if you really want to know how to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, really have the ultimate brand, check out ethicalrealestateprofessional.com. You can go there and you don't have to buy anything when you're there, because when you go to Premier Coaching, you're going to get Ethical Real Estate Professional for free. So there you go. Could we make it any easier for you, dear listener? No, we could not. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.